Hi everybody. Today we're going to review the book Hearts in Atlantis by Stephen King. I believe in my last episode or vlog I said that it was Hearts of Atlantis, so I apologize for that. It is actually Hearts in Atlantis, but I'm sorry for the confusion. To start, I'm going to refer to my awesome book, The Essential Stephen King, which talks about multiple books and short stories and novellas that he's done. If you haven't ever seen this book or read this book and you're a fan of Stephen King, I really recommend getting it and either, or looking at it at the library because it basically rates the Stephen King books and tells why this person thinks that they're great and gives, a little insight on what Stephen King was thinking, why he wrote each book, and, lots of other extra things like that. So anyway, what he wrote for Hearts in Atlantis is, let's see, when I was working on this book, a trusted colleague of mine, a fellow King expert, and I were discussing how I should treat Hearts in Atlantis. Is it a novel? Is it a novella collection like Four Past Midnight or Different Seasons? Is it a short story collection like Night Shift or Skeleton Crew? Or is it a weird hybrid of all of the above, and thus each work within its cover should be evaluated individually for inclusion in the top 100 list, which is what he does in this book. So, initially his friend, decided that this Hearts in Atlantis should be done as a novel. I don't know if I agree, but I see his point. Hearts in Atlantis is a book that consists of two kind of novellas, if you want to call it, like real short novels, and three short stories, or shorter thing. You know they're not novellas because they're much shorter. Anyway, it starts off, the first story that you read about is called Lone Men in Yellow Coats, and it takes place in 1960. And it focuses on an 11-year-old boy named Bobby Garfield, and he lives with his mother in Connecticut. I think the town, which I think is fictitious, is called Harwich, but I think it's really close to Bridgeport, which is not fictional. Anyway, again, Bobby lives with his mother, and his mother is, an odd person because she keeps telling Bobby that they have no money, because Bobby is about to turn 11, and for his 11th birthday, Bobby really wants a bike, and his mother's like, I can't afford a bike because, your father died and left me with nothing, and so now I have to work extra hard, for two parents to support you and blah, blah, blah. But Bobby knows that she also spends money selfishly, or she buys like expensive clothes. So, he's mad at her because she doesn't spend money on her son's happiness. She spends her money on her own happiness. So, but regardless, the thing that she does get Bobby for his 11th birthday is an adult library card at the Harwich Public Library, which means that he can now get any books he wants, which is really good because Bobby is a good reader. So, anyway, along with Bobby and his mother, who live in this apartment building, there's a older man who lives above them named Ted Brodigan, and originally Bobby's mother does not like Ted because she thinks that he's like gonna hurt Ted like sexually, and he's just like not a real nice guy. But Bobby really takes to Ted and really develops a friendship with him. And Ted is also a big reader and enjoys reading. And one of the books that he gives to Bobby is the book Lord of the Flies. And Bobby reads it and really is taken by it and really likes it. And so, he and Ted just start discussing Lord of the Flies and other books. But soon Ted kind of becomes a little like eerie or a little weird because he begins to get these like he kind of goes out of himself, kind of like trances where Bobby will like snap his fingers and ask if he's there, but he'll jump back to himself. But what he eventually tells Bobby that he's doing is he's actually getting psychic visions. And one of the things that he keeps getting visions about are these creatures that he calls low men in yellow coats. And he said, you'll know who they are because they'll leave like lost pet posters, but they'll be upside down. And there'll be other things like cars for sale, but they'll be upside down. And you'll find like stars and moons written or drawn on the ground and things like that. So Ted actually starts paying Bobby $1 a week to what they know, or they kind of do the outside, and to Bobby's mother is that Ted is paying Bobby $1 a week to read him the newspaper because, his eyes are going bad and things like that. But what's going on is Ted is wanting him to look out for these low men in yellow coats. And this is a Dark Tower story that kind of mirrors the Dark Tower in a way, because the reason why these low men in yellow coats are after Ted is because Ted is what's known as a breaker in the Dark Tower world. And a breaker is a person who can break the beams that hold the Dark Tower up. And if you're familiar with the Dark Tower, that will make sense. But if you're not, I'm not going to go on with that because I want you to read the Dark Tower. Anyway, so Ted ends up leaving with the low men in yellow coats, and Bobby is, really sad, of course, and things like that. But along with that, he also has run-ins with like friends of his, because Bobby is friends. His two best friends are a girl named Carol Gerber and a man named John Sullivan, who they call Sully John. And, they're just like 11-year-olds. They have fun. They play baseball. They do all sorts of, fun things like that. And there's a kind of rivalry gang of boys who come from parochial school, which I think is kind of funny that they're bad. But they're known, or their names are Willie Sherman, I couldn't think of it. Willie Sherman, Harry Doolin, and I think Ronnie McNamara or something like that. Anyway, but those three boys, there's one time where those three boys beat Carol up, and like Bobby finds her and her arm is dislocated, and eventually Ted ends up healing her arm. But anyway, Bobby eventually finds Harry Doolin because he thinks that he's the one that held the bat and beat Carol. So Bobby ends up beating Harry Doolin up. So that's a little bit of justice for Carol. So anyway, that's kind of where Bobby leaves the story for now. And then the next novella is the actual novella called Hearts in Atlantis. And that deals with in 1966. And it features a boy named Pete Riley, who is a freshman attending the University of Maine in Orono. And he's first of all, he's really into his studies, and but his studies kind of derail when he discovers the game of hearts. And he's introduced to the game of hearts by his floor mates, but instead of playing it kind of normally, they gamble with it, where like, each point that they get, they say like it's worth a nickel a point. So, and 100 points is the highest you can go, which means that, you could be out $20. And of course, this is like 1960s, kids, so in college, so they don't have money anyway. And anyway, but Hearts consumes his life for the time being. And also, because it's the 1960s, there's a talk of the war in Vietnam, or that's, impending. And other kind of social things that are equated with the 1960s. And one of the people that Pete meets is a woman named Carol Gerber, and she is the same Carol who went to school with Bobby Garfield. And Carol now goes to the University of Maine, and she and Pete work together. And they build, a relationship, and even though they both have significant others, but they build kind of a loving relationship, and both Carol wants something more, and because she's kind of into this anti-war atmosphere that, again, is consuming 1966 at the time. And so when Thanksgiving break happens, she's like, I don't think I'm going to go back to school because of this, because I have, there's other things that I could be doing with my life right now. And along with Carol Gerber being kind of anti-war, there's a man on Pete Riley's floor whose name is Stokey Jones, or Stokely Jones, people call him Stokey, and he is a cripple, as they say. I hate to say that, but he has a physical ailment where he uses crutches, and Stokey is the first guy that Pete notices having like anti-war protests, where he makes a peace sign on the back of his coat. It's kind of funny because Pete doesn't know what that is at the first part. He calls it like a sparrow track, which I think is kind of funny. But anyway, eventually Pete and the other people on Pete's floor make their own sparrow tracks on their coats. And there's one very rainy, kind of thunderstormy night where Stokey puts up a banner that says, like, F. Johnson, keep us out of Vietnam, and has peace signs on it. And the head of the college sees that and calls, everybody together saying who did that, and, nobody fesses up to it, and they certainly don't incriminate Stokey. So, anyway, and Pete is, again, he's hurt because he lost Carol, because Carol didn't move away, or didn't come back, and after Thanksgiving break, a lot of people in the Hearts games have left, like they've quit, or they had to quit school because their grades are faulting. And thankfully that doesn't happen to Pete, because Pete's like, well, instead of, if my grades fall, I can, I'll just, quit and join a job or get a job or something. They're like, this is serious. I could quit and be drafted and, and go to Vietnam, which nobody wants. So anyway, that's it for Pete. The next story is called Blind Willie, and it focuses on the Willie Sherman character of, again, Bobby Garfield and Carol Gerber's life, where it's now 1983, and Willie Sherman has fought in Vietnam, so he's a Vietnam vet, and he, on the outside, he looks like he's a nice businessman, and has a nice, like, corporate New York job, but on the inside, or what he actually does, is he goes along, like, Fifth Avenue, or goes along, the St. Pete's Church, is what it is, and he is a blind beggar. He acts like a blind beggar, and he makes a very good living doing that, because I think in the day that he did that, he walked away with, like, $3,000, and it's like the Christmas season, so this is, a good time to do that. But what's interesting about Willie is that he pretends to be blind, but there's a time during the day where he actually becomes blind, and it's like, it's known as somatic syndrome, I think, is where he, through, recollection of his life, especially his time in Vietnam, he realizes and remembers that this is the time when his plane or his helicopter was shot down, and he, along with Sully John, who also fought with him in Vietnam, were hurt, And Willie Sherman thought that he was blind for a while during when they were running away from their, they survived their helicopter going down, but they had to get out, and Willie was carrying Sully on his shoulders or in his arms or something like that, and because Sully was very hurt. And so this is the thing that Willie remembers and matches with his actual blindness. So honestly, for a very, very brief period of time during the day, maybe like 2 or 3 hours during the day, he's actually completely blind, and what he's doing is somewhat reputable. Anyway, so he also he thinks of Carol Gerber, because again they're related in the story, and other things like that. And then the next story that happens is a story that has to do with John Sullivan, or Sully John, and it's 1999, and Sully John has just arrived at a friend's funeral who was a former, or who was a likely Vietnam vet. It wasn't Willie Sherman, it was somebody else, but he goes to the funeral, and he's there with his kind of drill sergeant, who's, his along in his platoon in Vietnam, and they're both attending the funeral, and they have this long conversation of what the point of Vietnam was for, and why all of the Vietnam vets seem to be dying of like cancer and or other things like that, because that's what this Vietnam veteran died of. And so eventually Sully starts to go home, and he is in a traffic jam on the Triborough Bridge, and he has visions of an older woman in Vietnam who kind of helped him out. He calls her Mama San, and where she kind of sits in the car with him and guides him and says, it's all going to be okay, everything's going to be all right. And what happens is that Sully John eventually dies in this. He doesn't like die of the car crash. He ends up having a heart attack in the car accident. So that's it for him. So the last story is also based in 1999, and it goes back to Bobby Garfield, who, really had no presence in 1966, 83, and the first 1999 story. But again, people related to him were talked about, of course, like I said. So anyway, Bobby is there to attend John Sullivan's funeral. And he goes back to Harwich, which is where John Sullivan is buried. And he has not been there in like 40 years. So he like starts to remember what it was like, and starts to remember Ted and things like that. And he ends up running into a woman who he's convinced is Carol Gerber, even though she claims that's not her name. And they start to talk about life back in 1960 with Ted Brodigan, and how he both helped them and things like that. And so that's kind of where the book ends. It's not scary at all. It was odd to read because, if you are like a baby boomer, you would understand it and appreciate it, because there are a lot of Vietnam references and a lot of 60s references that me, not being a baby boomer, don't understand. But I enjoyed it. If you want to say that. The next book that I'm going to read is the On Writing book by Stephen King. It's a nonfiction book. So I bid you all farewell and happy reading.